So today we have Luke Yardley, founded a Yardley Brothers beer company.
Yeah, it was kind of a surreal moment. I called my wife and I was like, we're starting a brewery. We took all our savings. My wife had a life insurance policy. We cashed that in.
I'm not sure she was happy about that. Dude started selling it literally on the side of the road.
I was working part-time in education, and the weekend I was selling my homebrew on the side of the road.
Moment that you've had with Yardley Brothers where maybe you thought, holy shit, are we going to make it?
So we brewed our first batch of beer, and the knockout pump failed. So me and my brother were like, it was 700 litres of beer. So this is Seize the Means. We were thinking about what happens if Karl Marx was an Oompa Loompa.
I'm not going to let you get away with just saying that casually. What the fuck did that come from?
So this one's called Vos Boss.
What advice would you have for someone who's home brewing?
It's a dangerous addiction, and it'll lead to you opening a craft brewery.
Hey guys, Rickesh here, the Whiskey Chief. Firstly, thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciate it. If you could like and subscribe below, it really helps us bring the best whiskeys to you and keep doing this show the best we can. Thanks. Welcome to Whisky Unfinished, our podcast where the whiskey's never done and there's a conversation. So today we have Luke Yardley. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Luke owns, founded Yardley Brothers, a local, started here in homebrewed, right here in Hong Kong, beer company, which is now expanding into spirits and whiskeys, and we'll learn all about that. So today's show a little bit different. Usually we drink, and taste a couple of whiskeys, which we're going to try some new makes and some interesting stuff a bit later, but we're also going to be tasting some beer today, which I'm excited about. So today's episode, let's focus in a little bit on your journey. But let's talk about flavor. Let's make the theme flavor. So I know you're a huge, huge proponent of flavor, the importance of flavor. So let's unpack that as a theme, what that means for people, how you describe that, how you brand that. So do you want to start with a beer? Should we kick things off? Where do you want to start? Tell us a little bit about where you want to start.
So we're Yardley Brothers. We, as you say, definitely flavor focused, and we really focus on innovation. And one of the really important things with ours is quality ingredients. And I know within beer, our ingredients are, we've got barley, we got hops, we got yeast, we got water. But then we have adjuncts, and we also can add other things like cacao, or we can add vanilla pods, all sorts of things, fruit.
Sounds very interesting.
We do all sorts of things with our beers. So I'm a bit of a yeast nerd. I really enjoy interesting strains of yeast. So I brought along one beer which is all about yeast, and then one beer which is all about say adding other things. And in this case, it's cacao. Okay,
interesting. I've never had a cacao beer. Does anyone else do a cacao beer?
Oh yeah, definitely. Cacao is used. A lot of stouts are using cacao. The interesting thing with this one is that it's called Seize the Means, but the interesting thing is I work with a local chocolate factory in Hong Kong, so they freshly roast cacao for us. And we get this like super aromatic, fresh cacao, and they split the skin and the bean. And then so you can kind of get, for example, more like light milk chocolate from the skin, and more of that almost like red fruits, dark chocolate character. And we basically split it and then play with it. Anyway,
you're making me thirsty. Let's dive in. What do you want to start with?
All right. Well, you know what? Let's go straight to this one.
Okay.
So this one is called Vos Boss.
Great.
Vos is an amazing yeast. So Vos is a yeast that it's originally a Norwegian farmhouse yeast, and it is quite different to normal Saccharomyces. So normal Saccharomyces or normal beer is fermented at like maybe 18 to 22 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
This beer was fermented at 36 degrees Celsius. So that's super hot. And
what does that do? What does that mean, or what is that?
So what that does is it produces loads of esters, loads of fruity flavors, and essentially gives you a massive fruit-forward, delicious, juicy beer.
My style of beer. So I'm like, let's get into it, and let me ask you. Let's get into it. Let's open it up.
All right.
We it's a show about whiskey and drinking. So here you go.
So this is a hazy IPA.
Hazy IPA, one of my favorites.
As a hazy IPA, it's going to be like hop forward. That's a terrible pour.
That's all right. You didn't have the angle.
There you go. This is a better one for you. So as a hazy IPA, it's made with oats and wheat. The thing is we're also using hops, but a lot of the flavor is coming from the yeast here.
Very nice.
So there's something called biotransformation where the yeast works with the hops, but this is also just the ester profile of the yeast, which is kind of cool.
Cheers.
Cheers, man.
So, that tastes great. Well, I love that.
Thanks, man.
That's my kind of beer. I'm not gonna say that for every beer necessarily or everything we try. I'll try to just be honest if that's all right.
Yeah,
and things I like and don't like, but that's what flavor is, right? It's personal, right? Flavor is, I think, because obviously I work in the whiskey world, like we talk a lot about flavor, but I think flavor really comes down to your own palate, right? And everyone it has a different palate based on what they grew up eating, where they grew up, how flavor defines for them, right? Some people love spicy food, some people don't, etc. And I think those kinds of taste profiles, which people don't often realize, affects what kind of things you like to drink, right? It might be the style of the whiskey. Some people love peaty, some people like sherry, beer as well. It's a very personal thing, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
how do you think about flavor? What's your view on, when you think of flavor and you're trying to come up with a new flavor or something like that, how do you think about that? Do you have a framework in how you think about it?
I definitely agree as far as nostalgia
Yeah.
and sort of historical influences and inspirations. I guess I think flavor is one of the most interesting things as far as if you're someone who's always looking for something exciting and new and interesting, whether it's like tasting a new fruit you've never had or going to a new great restaurant or drinking a new whiskey. Like, to me, I get bored very quickly. And so I really enjoy finding new things. And, taste is something that, is very personal to me. It sounds weird, but like when I drink something delicious, little hairs on the back of my neck stick up, and I'm like, "Oh God, that was great." It's like a physical thing,
I'm with you on that.
So
and equally the other way, if you drink something terrible,
it can be pretty physical too, right?
Yeah, if you want to spit it out immediately because your life's too short to drink bad stuff.
Absolutely.
Or just things you don't like.
Yeah. So I mean, another side to it is creativity. Like you can kind of looking for what you want to do in life, and I love music, but I'm not a good musician. I'm a terrible. My handwriting is awful. I'm not a good painter. I don't have a steady hand. But like with taste, you can be creative.
Yeah.
So it's kind of my creative output, and I like or my creative release, let's say, and I enjoy that. Like enjoy that sort of thinking of it more like a palette and being able to mix different colors, different flavors.
The way you talk about it's really an art form, right? And so how do you, let's say tomorrow I said, Luke, let's start a new flavor.
Yeah.
What would you say to me? How would you even start? You were just telling me before we started recording that, for example, you collaborated with another beer brand based out of the UK and you created something interesting for a big festival in Beijing, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's a better question. Take me through that. So you guys come together. You're both brewmasters in different ways.
Yeah.
How does that conversation start? Of like, how are we going to create something together?
Okay, so I think that creating something new, it depends if there's like foundations to work on, or if it's like totally category defined.
So take me through that example. You met this guy from the UK, right?
Yeah.
And you guys met for the first time. What did you guys talk about when you started talking about what kind of beer are we going to create?
So basically, we were looking at kind of what are they famous for? What are we famous for? We're a mix. They are probably the best hazy IPA producer in the UK.
Okay.
We are.
Which brand was it? Sorry.
This is Track Brewing. Sorry,
Okay.
in Manchester.
Okay.
So doing amazing stuff, and for us, we're very well known around Asia for making sour beers. It's
Right.
kind of a thing that we make all sorts of beers. We make hazy IPAs, stouts, but. Sours and barrel aging is something that we're very well known for.
Okay. So how do you,
so we were like,
pardon the pun, blend those two very different styles, right?
So what we did is we essentially collaborated on making using their sort of more sort of hazy IPA malt profile, and we ended up making a bourbon barrel aged peach hazy sour.
That's a mouthful. That's not what you called it.
No. Yes,
A hazy IPA peach malt sour.
yeah, it was not IPA. It was
Oh,
hazy. There was not IPA. It was a sour, and it was peach and bourbon.
Why the peach? That's a unique. From my look, I'm not obviously I love beer. I've always drank beer, but I'm not a beer expert in any way. So pardon the kind of simple question. Where did the peach come from?
Well, okay, so we made a beer before called Mum's Rhubarb Crumble, which is a beer I made because my mum used to make rhubarb crumble as a kid,
Right.
and this was kind of my homage to that. It's the only beer I make that my mum says she likes.
So is it really like that rhubarb sweet,
It's definitely well,
sugar?
we use about 200 kilos of rhubarb in a batch, so it's got that rhubarb acidity, it's got that crispy sort of crumbliness. Anyways, this was what we did. We were like, okay, let's take a version of this, and then let's use their malt profile, but then let's also kind of have that pastry element. So what we were thinking of is like caramelized peaches with bourbon, like bourbon caramelized peaches pie. That was kind of our inspiration.
Interesting. And did you feel the final product was
it was great.
It was like that.
It was, it definitely had that pie character. It was very popular. Almost all of it got drank in Beijing, but a little bit of it made it to Hong Kong and a couple of other cities in China.
So when you're collaborating on something like that, how long is that process of like figuring out what you're trying to make, and then how many iterations do you go through? Or like I assume you make a very small batch, you taste, and then you go back and kind of alter things. Is that correct?
So the R&D on a beer can be a couple of weeks, or it can be a couple of years. The thing is if you're making something where you're building on foundations, if you're like, okay, in this example, we've already kind of got some element or understanding of a pastry pie themed beer.
Right. You're clear on the taste you're trying to achieve, right?
And so we've already got the parts in play that we know exactly how to do that. And then, so essentially it's just making some small changes, in which case you might do just one prototype batch and be able to say, okay, we're pretty good there. Or on the flip side,
you can hit it in the first try. Like that's pretty impressive.
No,
right?
you do it. Well, you might do one prototype, but there also you might not do a prototype batch, but you might do like in the lab. You might get some early mouth flasks, and for example, say, okay, if we soak the peaches in this much bourbon and burn them this much, how much flavor do we extract with this amount of alcohol?
Right.
For example.
Yeah.
So that's like R&D. It doesn't necessarily mean you're brewing a whole batch.
Right.
But
you're more testing the flavor that's coming out, and then you're calculating how much of that flavor do you actually want in the final beer. Is that right?
Yeah, and then also sourcing.
It's like a recipe, right?
Getting, okay, what different type of peaches are we going to use? What's the supplier? A peach at this time of the year versus a peach at that time of year could be much more sour.
That's a lot of variables. So how many different peach variations did you try
you go through?
to figure out which peach to use? But how many?
I made peach beers before, so we have a peach supplier. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure these guys are going to be good. So we got a decent peach.
You have a peach guy. If I call you out,
I got a peach guy. If you need
I got a peach guy. Look, I thought that was really excellent. I think that's obviously, since it's gone, I think that's a great beer. Shall we try a second beer?
Yeah, sure.
This one is more about cacao, right?
So this is Seize the Means. Seize the Means of production. We kind of had a bit of a laugh. We were thinking about Willy Wonka chocolate, and we were thinking about what happens if Karl Marx was an Oompa Loompa. And if you look at the
what if Karl Marx was an Oompa Loompa? I'm not going to let you get away with just saying that casually. What the fuck did that come from? Like Karl Marx with an Oompa Loompa is not a normal consideration. Like what made you think of that?
My mind is weird, and
I'm learning that here. I like the creativity.
So basically, on the artwork, you've got like a revolution happening in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, and anyways, he's being executed by like a Robespierre Oompa Loompa, and
so the Oompa Loompas have taken over. There's a coup.
Pretty much, yeah.
And how does that relate to? So let me ask you this: did you come up with the flavor for the beer and then create that brand, or did you come up with the brand and then create a beer that you think is representative of that? Of that, brand.
I wanted to very specifically make a beer that expressed chocolate. Okay. There are a lot of beers in the market that are a stout with a hint of chocolate.
Yeah.
There are a lot of beers in the market that are chocolate, but they're using artificial flavors like extracts and things like this. So I was like, okay, I really want to express chocolate. I love chocolate, like chocolate as a good chocolate is beautiful, and I love, for example, pairing whiskey with good chocolate.
Yeah, I think that really works, and I think that's why my favorite chocolate is always like a darker chocolate with sea salt, because I feel that pairs best with whiskeys, because the sea salt flavor goes great, particularly with lightly peated whiskeys, in my opinion, because a lot of the peat and for me, like having been to Islay in Scotland, you get that kind of sea air, and everything is just kind of coming into the flavor of what ends up. Obviously, I know that that's not how they put in the peat, but I feel like it has some of those aromas and things kind of in there, like a Bowmore, like a sherried Bowmore 15. Actually, we were drinking that last night. Like, to me, that reminds me of that. And then I think the dark chocolate with sea salt just kind of somehow, for me, again, it's all personal. Yeah, kind of works well. So
and I mean, there's a big range within chocolate, right? You can get like a dark chocolate with super red fruits. You can get like, so I think, chocolate's a beautiful thing. And I kind of was like, okay, how can I express that in a beer?
All right, I'm curious to try. I'm not a big stout guy or...
Well, here we go. So this is made using locally roasted cacao. So my friend Amit and Salim run a local chocolate factory in Hong Kong.
Yeah. What's the chocolate?
It's called Conspiracy Chocolate.
Conspiracy.
And if you want to taste amazing chocolate, I highly recommend you try Conspiracy.
And what kind of chocolate do they do that made you think, hey, that's what I want to put in this?
So they work with a farm in Vietnam, so Dak Lak Vietnamese cacao. They roast it in Hong Kong, and then they split so they're making just super intense and fresh chocolate. And the thing that I think is interesting with this is that what I wanted to do was look at how the skin of a cacao bean versus the nib of a cacao bean, you might get that kind of like red fruit, that coffee character from the nib, but the skin is much more like vanilla fudge.
Wow, that's super interesting. I never would have thought of taking, like, when you go down to the cacao bean level, that you're even going further and thinking about the skin versus just literally the nib of it.
If you smell this, it's almost nutty on the nose.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. This is nutty and actually relatively light for a stout is how I would describe it. It's not a heavy stout.
This is a chocolate fudge beer.
Yeah.
Within beer categories, I'm not really looking for beer categories here. I'm looking at expressing the cacao.
And the flavor,
Yeah.
I definitely get the cacao even on the nose.
And you taste sort of so the ratio in making this, we use like 3 times more skin than we do nib in this. So you're really getting like almost like a cacao tea.
Yeah. I think this was all just an excuse for you to eat more chocolate in order to do all the testing you had to do.
It could be. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun project. And so with the artwork of this, basically I said, I want to make an amazing chocolate beer. I knew Amit at the time. I was like, hey, Amit, let's talk about chocolate. How do you extract great flavor from chocolate? I also talked to our amazing artist. So Ben Appleby is the guy who designed this.
I love the art, by the way. I think that's super, super interesting. So wait, from a trademark point of view, are you allowed to just do that? Or did you have to get permission are Oompa Loompas trademarked?
As far as I know, not. Okay. They're not exactly the Oompa Loompas of other.
Right.
Hopefully not.
There's enough connotation without going down that road. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
But
love the artwork though.
But this was made at the very beginning of our company when we were still a really tiny brewery. There were 3 of us, and we were pulling 14-hour days. I'd finish a 14-hour day, go home to Ben's house, and then I'd be like, "Hey Ben, I've got a whole load of beer. Let's drink and come up with ideas." And that,
as all best ideas are made, is over a couple of drinks of some kind.
And that is when the question of what if Karl Marx was an Oompa Loompa, I asked that to Ben, and that's where this came from.
That makes sense. So every guy in the world who drinks, I think at some point or another has thought, hey, I should own a bar or I should start a beer brand. It just like comes into, I don't know what it is about the male ego, but I've definitely been in multiple conversations with groups of friends where somebody at some point says, yeah, we're so good at drinking, we should start a beer brand, or we're so good at drinking, we should own a bar, which I did, by the way, and we ended up owning a bar here in Hong Kong for 2 years. a small one in Kwai Fong. So I had that experience. That experience. I never want to be involved in any bar ever again. having done that for 2 years, it was super fun experience, but it was also super challenging. And I feel very lucky that we got out and we were able to sell the bar and make a little bit of money and kind of move on. But drinking for free for 2 years was a good perk. What I guess made you say, "Hey, I want to start a beer brand"? And when was this? Like, take us back to, I think it was 2015, 2016, around that time, right?
Yep. So actually,
what were you doing at that time? You were nothing to do with
nothing to do with beer, and like I think that what led me to starting a beer brand starts actually way before that. Like I studied philosophy in Edinburgh. Before I went to university, I sort of trained to be a chef for a year. And I realized I really love food. I love cooking. So when if I wasn't a brewer, I'd be a chef for sure.
Okay.
And then I was a student. I was a broke.
Again, flavor, right? So that's always been in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was a student, I was broke and I needed a bit of extra money. So a friend of mine said, "Hey, I've got a gig. Do you want to come and help work at this gig I've got?" And it was at the Scottish Malt Whisky Society. And so
I know it well.
It's a great space. So I worked as a waiter there, basically on and off for about 2 years. I did some.
This is during uni, so
during uni times,
like 20-ish years ago.
Yeah. So that was an eye opener for me. That was when I first tasted like, wow, I'd been introduced to like, good food and some nice drinks by my parents as a kid, but the Scottish Malt Whisky Society was like, wow, whiskey.
Did you get to, just as being a waiter there, get to try things, or how does that work? Like, what was the exposure, or were you stealing some nips along the way?
No, could be the second one.
You could be honest now. That was 20 years ago. I don't think anyone from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society is going to watch this. So I think you're safe. You'd be safe. You're safe here.
There was a couple of times where they'd have these really posh dinners, like long table, maybe 20, 25 people drinking, and they'd have a whiskey, they'd have a dram for every course.
Right.
And a lot of these guys were sort of there for a business meeting, and they'd serve almost like better and better whiskey as it went on. But by the end, you'd find be clearing the table. And I was like,
nobody's even touched it.
I used to get a plastic bottle and pour them into a little plastic bottle. And my student flat had bottles of whiskey, and it would be like, something stunning.
You probably had one of the best collections in Edinburgh that way.
So I had a little collection of some random bottles from some events like that.
Do you remember any one whiskey that for you from that experience really like where you had a moment, like what we would call a somewhat of an epiphany, like, holy shit, whiskey's not just something you put soda in, but like this is single malt, this is at that level, like, wow, I didn't know that was possible. Like you were saying earlier, the hairs on the back of the neck stood up. Is there a whiskey for you that did that you remember?
There was, but I don't actually know the name of the whiskey, because in the society they put a coordinate and a name.
Right.
So there was a particular whiskey that was called Purple as a Prince. And
you can look that up now. They have they have a like decoding
online.
All
right.
Yeah, that was the case. But somebody figured out their coding and how they do it. So you should look that up.
So I know this is controversial, but I know it was a Welsh whiskey. It was a young Welsh whiskey, and it was like passion fruit. It was so fruity. It was absolutely not your normal whiskey, and it was inspiring. When I drank it, I was like, "What is this?" It was something that was totally off piste, and that was very, very exciting.
You're making me want to try a whiskey. Shall we? Tell us about what you're doing in the world of whiskey a little bit.
Well, so for us, we're still very much in the prototyping stage. We're not, we're not here to. We don't have any whiskey to sell.
Yeah.
But for me, whiskey is a passion, taste is a passion, and essentially whiskey is whiskey wash is beer. That's what it is.
Yeah. The first few steps of making whiskey, for people who don't know, is basically starting to make a beer, right?
Yeah, that's a high ABV beer. But
a very high ABV beer.
Yeah. And I mean,
well, like what ABV does it get to at that point?
Well, like between 10 to around 15%.
Yeah.
Is what we for a wash.
I've definitely tried it I've definitely tasted it in a distillery in Scotland, and from my knowledge, back in the day, they don't do it anymore. The people who used to work in the distilleries used to actually drink that stuff, and it's pretty terrible. The taste is terrible, and it like kills your stomach. But I guess that was a free way of getting drunk at work. So back in the like, whatever 80s and 70s and stuff, people used to drink that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's wash is super important. Like a product is a sum of everything, right? So it is the beer, it's the distilling, it's the cask, it's all the different things that make the final thing. But for me, I spent this part of my life until very recently focusing on the beer side, on the yeast, on how to ferment and how to create interesting flavors. So as I mentioned, I really am into yeasts, and I was like, what if we use some process of making the way we make beer and look at how we could make an interesting wash? So I started messing around with that about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
With a friend of mine, and we've done some really weird and out there things. We've done some traditional things. We've done all sorts.
All right.
So
tell us about one of them.
So this is just a fun prototype. It's not actually.
Well, we appreciate you bringing it on just to have a taste. And
it's a personal project. It's not actually part of Yardley Brothers. It's at the moment, let's say it's not an official. It's just me having fun. I'm looking at what I can do and what we might be able to do in future.
Exciting.
So we have. Here we've got something which is a bit more peat focused. We've got something which is inspired by cacao. We've got a corn and rye whiskey, and we have something which is basically using a yeast which makes loads of mango flavor,
Okay.
And it's kind of totally out there.
Let's start there.
Should we start? You want to go straight to that?
Let's
Okay.
start there. Let's start with mango. You had me at mango. I like mango. So
it's not necessarily that you would make a whiskey like this, but what you could do is you could age a barrel and then blend it into something else to add elements of it, or that's the idea.
That's the idea. So this was not obviously the finished product, but this is just experimenting with how you could extract mango flavor, right?
Sorry. Actually, wait a second. I've just realized. I've poured you the wrong whiskey.
Yeah, I was like, that's not very mango.
This is peat.
Okay.
So we'll leave that one.
Or you want to move?
Yeah, let's leave this one for a little bit later, and we'll go to. That's definitely
first.
This is why you should label your bottles.
Yeah, it's a good practice. Thankfully, you can tell the difference pretty easily.
So here we go. Have a bit of smell of this.
So what stage of the prototyping are we at with this one in your mind? Like where are you thinking like, hey, this has achieved what I wanted to, or what do you think?
I mean, this is it's one of many experiments we've done and many more we could do. This is also
what's the age of this?
This is like 3 months.
In what?
This is 3 months in so we've got this as a raw spirit, but this one has been in a Badmow. Essentially,
what, sorry?
A Badmow. So it's essentially a cask which has the normal proportion of like a hogshead.
Right.
So it's stainless steel and with a wooden head on the front.
Oh, I don't think I've ever heard of that. Why would you use something that's stainless steel with a wooden
because if you use we're only making small amounts. If you use a small barrel, the ratio of liquid to surface air in the barrel is going to super over extract. And
like a quarter, like they make quarter casks.
Yeah, you extract way too quickly, right?
Right.
And it's the same problem with so for us, what we're trying to see is into the future. We're trying to okay, what would this be like if we filled a full barrel and put it down for 6 years?
And what is the answer to that question in your view when you taste this? Right.
Well, in my view,
it's super interesting, and for 3 months old, I think that's actually pretty impressive. So,
I mean, the reason
I'm not saying I would drink it, by the bottle or anything, but I think it's interesting at what you've created so far.
the thing with this is
There's still a lot of alcohol in it, right? What ABV are we at, do you know?
this right now, I think we're around the 50% on this.
I mean, I really love the nose, and I really like the front palate. For me, the back is still quite harsh,
it's not
which is
whiskey.
obviously young spirit, right? But the color you've achieved in just a couple of months is great and pretty interesting. And you're starting to get some of those mango or maybe sweet notes, right?
Yeah. And I think that to say that this is a short, relatively short age thing, and it's not too wild, is partly to do with, I said, the approach of yeast and making good wash. Like making a great wash is super important. And part of that is having a good cell count, making sure your yeast is super healthy, making sure that the yeast can get up to, that 10 or 15% without struggling at all. Because what you're doing when you're distilling, you're just condensing. So whatever you make in your wash, like it's all the precursor to everything else afterwards, the flavors and everything. So if you have a super smooth, super happy yeast that's making great, healthy alcohol, let's say, then when you distill it, you're going to get a relatively smooth result.
You're the only person that can make yeast sound so good.
Well, yeah, it's very important. So yeah, that's this is, and that's why I guess we're pitching at a way higher cell count than normal, and we're very careful daily to make sure that we're having a good fermentation curve.
Very interesting. So take us back to 2016, 2015. What are you doing, and what makes you start? Were you already home brewing, and then how did tell me a bit of the origin story of Yardley Brothers.
So what happened for me when I was young, my parents had quite a lot of apple trees, so we used to make cider. My uncle Simon was a brewer, and he taught me a little bit how to make a bit of homebrew, and I could basically brew a bit.
This is when you were a kid still.
Yeah, this is when I was young, living
normal kid life, brewing beer at home.
Well, yeah, so it was a way to get free alcohol when I was underage.
Yeah. Much smarter than me. I was trying to sneak into bars and getting fake IDs and stuff. You're like, I don't need to bother with that. I'll just make the alcohol at home. Yeah, much smarter. You went directly to the source.
So, but I, then fast forward a little bit, I sort of got interested in food, did philosophy, turned up in Hong Kong, fell in love with China, and I saw like, wow, electric cars and digital payments. This is super exciting here. So I didn't want to go back to Edinburgh. I wanted to stay here
with your philosophy degree.
With no clue what I was going to do. Right. Like I and actually I had I could have gone back and got a job back home, but I just wanted to stay here because I knew there was something exciting here. And then fast forward a couple of months, my brother quit his job in London and decided to travel around Asia. But his first stop was Hong Kong. And he turned up with some barley and hops and yeast in his bag.
Again, pretty normal, as people do when they travel.
And yeah, we brewed our first batch of Lamma IPA, and that was our first ever beer.
What year was that?
So that would have been 2015. Did it be in 2015? Okay. Yeah.
So that's how it started.
That's the beginning of everything, yeah.
And was there always a plan, hey, let's see if we can turn this into a business and sell it? Or you guys were just making beer for fun?
It was like zero plan. Like it was, we made some beer.
Where were you working at the time in 2015? What were you doing?
I'd tried to start, basically I'd worked in a business school. So I'd been selling MBAs. Okay. And then I tried to start my own education company, and it failed very quickly. And
what was that? What was the
it was called Teacher Connect. We wanted to basically provide teachers and syllabus after school teaching programs. And I miscalculated that I didn't have any connections. I had no guanxi here at all. So that didn't work. But we started brewing beer. My friends were like, "Hey, this beer's pretty good." But back then, the beer scene in Hong Kong was not, to be honest, not good.
It was Carlsberg and Heineken.
It was, and there was a couple of
very little, if any, I don't know.
There was some local craft beer, but it was bad. It was not very well made. I've got to say, any of the brands that were around then they've changed ownership and now they're making good beer for sure.
Yeah.
But
Even
like
Guaylo beer and stuff, I don't think was around. I don't if it was. It
Guaylo
wasn't
was
big.
not around there.
Yeah, it
Like
wasn't
basically,
big.
Hong Kong Beer Co. is the oldest, and those guys are making great beer now. And before that, there was a guy called Pierre, and Pierre ran Typhoon Brewing Company. That was like the first craft brand.
Oh yeah, I kind of remember that, but I don't remember ever drinking it or ordering it.
He made British real ale, like
That's probably why. I
that's
don't
probably why you
like,
didn't drink
I
it.
hate that stuff. I'm not a fan of old style English, generally served warm and bitter style beer. I get that some people love it. And again, this is just
I do,
yeah, it's just a flavor thing, right? So I grew up in Hong Kong, so it's generally always pretty hot in Hong Kong. So I like cold beer. Like I like my beer to be cold. I grew up drinking kind of more Carlsberg stuff, and then I went to the U.S. and I was drinking more like Rolling Rock. I don't know if you ever heard of that. And I went to school in Michigan, so we drank a lot of Canadian beers. We had Labatt Blue. Labatt Blue was like, we were drinking, we were drinking it as if it was going out of style. We were drinking it heavily. And then I moved to New York, and then I think in New York, kind of more of the craft scene. This is like 2000s.
So that's probably a good introduction to good craft beer. 2000
Yeah,
the
that's where,
some stuff.
there was always something cool and interesting and different to try, right?
Yeah,
I think even some of the bigger brands now weren't that big back then, like a Sierra Nevada and stuff was not as huge as kind of it is now. And
or Brooklyn, like
actually, I remember going to Brooklyn Lager. Gosh, this must have been about 20 plus years ago, where all they had was that little place in Brooklyn. Like they only made beer there, and they basically only distributed it around New York. That was it. And we used to go there on Sundays, and they always had this experience part of it, because they always had like really nice picnic tables, and people used to sit and play board games and even bring their kids and their dogs. And like it was just a super fun, chill place to like have a beer and relax, which again, not correct me if I'm wrong, was that relatively new? Because there wasn't this beer experience thing back then, right? You'd buy a beer at a bar, or you'd buy a beer, at a restaurant or a hotel, but there wasn't this, hey, let's visit the brewery and let's hang out. Were they some of the pioneers at that time?
Definitely the pioneers. Like Garrett Oliver, who decided Brooklyn, like these guys are definitely the pioneers of industry. They're all way before me.
Yeah.
I actually met him when I first started brewing beer. Like he came to Hong Kong. I had no idea who he was, and he gave me a beer, and I was like, wow, this is really good.
I love Brooklyn Lager.
And he just had a chat with me, and it was funny. Like I was up in Beijing, I mentioned, for the 8x8 festival.
Yeah.
And I caught up when they get him there.
Was he brewing something there with someone else?
I think he now he kind of just goes around the world, doing interesting experiments.
Yeah.
His last experiment was in Africa. He was using like a new grain called fonio to produce it's like a new future grain that's way more sustainable to produce new lagers. It's really interesting stuff.
You guys are all about creating new stuff, right?
This is
this is now the new world, but like
Yeah.
I mean, at least in my, like when I was 20 something years old, there was much less option in terms of beer, and it was just all kind of the bigger brands and things like that.
It's the thing that happened is like around that sort of 2000 going forward is that a lot of people start to realize that beer is an amazing, if you think of it as a substance or a thing that you can do with it, super pliable, right? Wine is wonderful. I love good wine. But with wine, you're constricted by your grapes, the season, the terroir.
And you can't make it at home.
I think you can, but it's normally pretty fun.
You don't want to make it at home. There's only certain things you can really make at home, right? Like people used to make gin at home. I don't know if they still do, whatever, bathtub gin, right? That name comes from people literally making gin in their bathtub decades ago, right? I don't think people do that as much. But now I can go buy a home brewing kit right now, right? And brew something relatively quickly. You can't really do that with wine or whiskey or, things like that. It's harder.
Yeah, so it's the amazing.
It's very accessible beer.
Barley is accessible. That's what's interesting. You can get great barley. You can bring it, into Hong Kong. You can bring a single yeast cell to Hong Kong, grow it up into as many as you want, and then make an amazingly delicious and fresh and innovative product. And that's kind of that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So that I think that's what sort of pushes that creativity, because you've got your base, which is beer, but we can use different yeasts. We can add chocolate, we can add fruit, we can make it sour, we can make a beer that tastes like Thailand. Like, we can have chilies and basil in it. We can make a beer that is like an ice cream, and
Right. Any flavor really in the world that exists, or maybe even doesn't exist in a way that you can, that whatever you can think up, you can try to create it. It sounds like.
So that's why,
which is crazy.
Yeah, it is totally crazy. But that's the craft beer. That's why craft beer, because it allowed people to express themselves in all these creative ways and make all these different things, and that.
But you need to find something, I guess, that's enough for there's enough demand for that one thing, right? Like, you could create a Thai chili whatever beer, but maybe people in Thailand don't like it, and people, who knows how many
could be
people kind of want that. So let's try the next beer.
All right.
Well, speaking of,
so talking about like esoteric and unusual things.
Here we go. Nice segue.
So this is Solara. So this is a beer that I made basically 4 years ago, and it's a barrel-aged mixed fermentation sour beer.
Okay.
So this,
when you say sour beer, just clarify what that means.
So sour beer, there's a long tradition of sour beers from Germany, from Belgium producers. Essentially, it's a beer which has a low acidity, and it's because there is a bacteria or a yeast which is producing acid during a slow maturation.
That's what creates the sourness.
Yeah. So you could have a kettle sour, that would be lactobacillus, and that could be soured within 24 hours, and you get that Yakult.
Yeah.
That healthy gut bacteria. So it's that kind of essentially a strain, a version of that bacteria, which produces lactic acid. But then you've got beers like this, which is made with Brettanomyces. So this has Brettanomyces, lactobacillus in it. You can also have things like Pediococcus, which are very slow acting and produce a more ascetic. So the next beer, I'll show you a little bit with that. Anyways,
tell us about Solara as well.
Let's get it open. This beer just won the Master Cup in China. So
congratulations.
So we're pretty happy with that. It was just the end of last year. So for the best sour in China, and it's. This is beer, but if you don't mind, I'm gonna pour it in a whiskey glass.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This sort of beer is definitely better served in a wine glass. It's also better served at the right temperature. So
what is the right temperature?
So you want this at around 12 degrees, let's say. You don't want this too cold, because so this is aged in Sauternes barrels for 4 years with Feijoa fruit, and then blended with a younger barrel, so that's why we call it Solara. We're taking age and blending with a younger beer.
I'm not sure, but I think this is my first time ever drinking beer out of a Glencairn whiskey tasting glass.
Well,
so
cheers.
You've done something at least pioneering today. I don't think I've ever poured a beer into a whiskey glass, and now I'm wondering why I haven't done it. But that's really interesting.
So this is definitely blending the lines between beer and wine. It's
a lot of citrus for me, and obviously the acidity, right? And you're getting a lot of that kind of like, puckering kind of mouthfeel at the end, right? Which I assume is the part of the character.
Yep, that's part of the acidity, and then the acidity sort of extracts that oaky character. You'll notice you got to get some of that French oak in there.
This is kind of like half beer, half something else. I don't know. It's almost not. It's got like a beer for me. For me personally, it's almost not all beer.
That's the thing. What is a beer? What does it have to taste like?
What is a beer? We're gonna have to delve into. Now, this is your philosophical side coming out. This is your degree at full work here. Right? At least your parents or you did whatever paid for these. 3 years of university. At least now it's coming into effect.
It's starting to pay off.
So what advice would you have for somebody who's listening right now who's home brewing, let's say, or just kind of starting in home brewing? You're obviously way past that and kind of obviously at the professional level. What advice would you have for someone like that? What would you tell them now?
it's a dangerous addiction, and it'll lead to you opening a craft brewery.
And will it? Does it? Is that
Absolutely can, and like that's something that I think it's well, it really depends, I guess, on your sub personalities, because with homebrewing, you're gonna fail a lot. You're gonna make your first homebrew batch, and it's gonna taste bad, and then you're gonna do it again, and it's still gonna taste pretty shitty, and it's gonna cost you like way more than it costs to go down to the shop and buy a cheap beer.
right?
But if you really enjoy the process, and if you really and you don't mind failing a lot and keep improving, it's super rewarding
And very addictive, it sounds like.
yeah, well, it was
Like
for me.
the
Like,
geeky part.
yeah, and you know, it's being able to make a tangible product yourself is really satisfying, especially something that you know, you can share with friends. That social element where you can, hey guys, I made this, or
It's very cool.
you know, there's something about that which is nice. And
So at what point did you decide to go, you know, you made the decision, obviously, hey, we're not just going to homebrew, we're going to make this a business. I assume with your brother, that's why it's called Yardley Brothers. But
that's right, yeah.
what was that moment? Like, was there a critical point where you had, how many beers had you made? How many different styles had you made? And what made you decide, all right, fuck it, let's go for this. Yeah.
There was a very, very clear moment for that. Like it was, we were, so I used to have this corrugated iron shack on Lamma Island where I brewed my beer in the back. I was working, you know, part-time in education, and the weekend I was selling my homebrew on the side of the road. And
So you'd started selling it literally on the side of the road.
yeah,
How much were you selling?
well, wasn't actually selling it, but I was just I was drinking with my friends, and a tourist walked by and said, "Can I buy one?" I said, "Yeah, $50." And then he paid me. I was like,
50 Hong Kong
"Yeah,
dollars.
50,
Yeah.
not US." Yeah, and so I gave him a pint, and that's how we began. But it became popular, getting really popular. We started having like queues.
Which
up
I
the
think
road.
was illegal at that point, by the way. You definitely were not allowed
Yeah,
to sell beer to whoever.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So you had your own lemonade. You had an adult lemonade
I had an
stand.
adult, I had a drunk.
That's not what you're saying.
I had a drunken, absolutely a drunken adult lemonade stand, and
I can like kind of picture you there, just like sitting on the side of the road. It's a hot afternoon.
You're just sell free beer, and people would come and have a taste.
If I walked by, I go, yeah, definitely.
We were
exactly what I need in this moment.
we were totally bootstrapping it. It worked, but then for some crazy reason, we decided to enter into a commercial beer competition.
Okay, so that was the proof point
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
That was the validation
We were like,
from
yeah, let's
not just your friends, because your friends have a bias. Let's be honest,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they might tell you honestly if they don't like it, but but there is a bias to try to want to like it from the first place because they're your friends, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, we entered into something called Beertopia, and it was like in Hong Kong, it was all
huge. Yeah.
big commercial brands entered into it, and we ended up winning the best in show.
And what beer was that?
It was a beer we called the Hong Kong Bastard.
And it's not, you don't make that beer.
I do, yeah. We make it seasonally. Now it's a special seasonal, so once a year we make the Hong Kong Bastard.
Why did you call it the Hong Kong Bastard?
Okay, so when we first started making beer in Hong Kong, everyone told us we needed to make light, low ABV, easygoing lager. That's what we're told will sell.
Because that's what sells. Carlsberg is, I think Carlsberg and Heineken are probably, this is my guess, probably the best sold beers in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
Because they kind of control the distribution and have done from, I don't know, at least I grew up in Hong Kong, right? So like in the 90s growing up here, like if you went to any kind of bar,
Oh, that was fun.
that was all they had. Yeah.
Yeah, there was no choice. But basically, we were here to give people choice. So we didn't have a designer, and we decided for our basically our second beer we ever made to make an 8% super hoppy, insanely
8%.
yeah, like a
That's
big
like Belgian kind of like Delirium Tremens, which is one of my favorite beers. I think they're at that kind of like 7-8. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. More like Belgian style ABV.
Yeah, that'll get you drunk.
So we
Much
made
quicker than you think.
big punchy IPA called the Hong Kong Bastard, and yeah, it ended up winning the best in show at the beer competition.
Of course it did. Everyone got drunk just trying that. No, but that's an amazing. So that was the validation that made you and your brother decide, hey, let's start.
It was it was a bit more than that, because after we got off stage from getting our little like check and handshake or whatever, one of the judges came over to me, a guy called Pierre, who started Typhoon Brewing Company.
Yeah.
And he said, Luke, I've got a, actually he said, Luke, I want to meet you tomorrow. So I met him in the Globe the next day and we sat down and he gave me a key. And I was like, what's that? He said, I'm going to give you a present. And I was like, okay. And it was a key to a container in Lantau. And inside was all of his old brewing equipment.
You're kidding.
Yeah,
Really?
so that's how. I mean, I didn't have any money at the time.
He just gifted that to you.
He gave it me as a gift. Yeah, he gave me.
What a
he gave
generous, amazing kind of pay it forward moment from somebody who is successful, and he thought, hey, this guy could really do something with this.
It was kind of a surreal moment. I called my wife and I was like, we're starting a brewery. And that was the beginning of things. So
like what was, do you think, the value of that equipment that he gave you back then?
I mean, he probably
like if you had to go buy all that stuff.
About $1 million Hong Kong dollars worth.
$1 million Hong Kong dollars, like 150,000 US.
It was like a small not compared to big breweries, it was not that big, but it was still, for me at the time, that was huge. There's no way I had that cash.
That's an amazing. And are you still very connected to him?
Yeah, well, I mean, so Pierre said to me at the time, so in order to get the brewery running, we had to take all our life savings to basically get a unit and make it licensable and all that. And so we got it running, and then I said, Pierre, like, what's the plan? Do you want to brew with me all the time, or you're welcome? And he said, I'll let you know. So,
okay.
And so he's turned up to my brewery once. He turned up, he brewed one batch of beer with me. So he never
became an investor or a shareholder.
He just said, go for it, like go do it. And like, and he said, and still to this day, it stands, if he ever wants to come and brew a beer, he can take over my brewery for you.
Yeah, I would think so, right? Do you send him batches of stuff ever? Or
sometimes he pops into our bars. We have a bar in Central called Yardley's.
Yeah.
And he pops in there or comes to the Globe. But yeah, so
I love that story. Yeah, the Globe is great here in Hong Kong in terms of having a selection of beer. Like that's a great bar to actually try different things.
Right? It is, yeah.
It's probably the longest standing institutional bar there is in terms of a traditional, like, hey, you can try a bunch of different things on tap. I think they kind of started that here in Hong Kong. Now there's a few others.
They also helped, like it was the sort of the center of what helped kick off the local sort of craft beer scene.
Yeah.
Like the Craft Beer Association still meets there today. There's an amazing guy called Toby who used to be the manager of the Globe, and he was the guy who started the Craft Beer Association of Hong Kong.
How many people are making beer in Hong Kong that we need an association?
We have an association. Yeah.
How many of you are there?
Give or take, there's a range of different sizes within Hong Kong. There's around 14 breweries active in Hong Kong, I'd say.
I think I knew that. Yeah.
Of them, there's different sizes.
Of course.
So, there's us, Hong Kong Beer Co., and Young Masters, and we're probably the three biggest, I guess, in Hong Kong by output. But then there's lots of other different size breweries doing great stuff.
Super interesting. Should we try a second whiskey? What else?
Okay. So we're gonna go. What are we going to go to? Let's go to this one.
And the beer was super interesting, and trying it out of a whiskey glass made it even more interesting.
Yeah, we better change glasses because, like,
I'm putting that away. I'm putting the beer one over here. I still got the peat.
This is the peat one, which I'm going to keep to slightly later. So this one is lightly peated. But what's interesting about this is essentially uses chocolate malt, so chocolate barley. It has cacao in the wash. It was just an experiment to see like survivables, like what comes through, what aromas stay after you distill.
And is this all made here in Hong Kong? Obviously, the barley's not coming from Hong Kong, or like what parts of this process?
So the barley's come from my brewery.
Okay. So is it all Hong Kong all the way through then, or is there any parts of it?
Yes. Well, so this basically is produce the washes. I produce wash myself, and then we basically are prototype distilling. There is one spot in Hong Kong which has a distillery, and then we made some wash for those guys, and then I started playing around with doing other things. And
there's the Kowloon Spirit.
Kowloon Spirit, yeah.
Right.
So those guys are basically producing.
We have a bottle
gin,
of that here. We tried that.
gin, vodka, and also they're doing some.
So do you think you'll launch a whiskey one day?
Well, so I'm going to be 40 in about 3 weeks, and I think for my 40th year, filling my first barrel would be
That's the goal.
that would be a plan. Yeah.
Okay, I like it. And then eventually something you might release to the public, or no?
Yeah, but give it time.
Yeah.
Like I think that I don't believe in rushing things. Like I think you can do non-aged statement whiskeys that are delicious, but you still need some time.
Yeah. So tell us more about this.
Okay, yeah. So
You
this,
said there's a cacao. This has got.
so yeah,
What
essentially,
were you trying to create here? Kind of similar in a way to the Oompa Loompa beer. I know that's not what it's called.
well,
but
yeah. No, this is just
that's how I'm remembering
this is
it.
an experiment to see what happens when you get the chocolatey wash, and what happens. Does any of that sort of caramel, fudgy cacao character come through into it?
I get some of it, but to be honest, I get that because you said that. I'm not sure.
And I
not
would
sure
I
I
would
would-
agree. We put
yeah.
a shit ton of very expensive cacao in this.
Yeah, because you said that, it's in my head, and so now I'm kind of smelling it. But if you hadn't, if I just tasted this on its own, I'm not sure that those are the notes I would say.
At the end of the palate, you might get what you kind of get a little bit on the nose of the chocolate beer. Once you've fully swallowed the whiskey, just a little bit of the back of your throat, you get a little bit of it. But all I would say is it would be very, very, very expensive to do that. So that's the answer to that experiment.
Yeah.
It's definitely doable. It would be expensive
Because of the cacao, or what's making it
cacao.
expensive?
Cacao, good quality cacao is expensive. Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
So that's a prohibitive factor.
Yeah, but I think that this was just one experiment. Maybe we tweak it a little bit, but I think that there's a lot of potential to create interesting flavors.
I agree. Hey guys, Rickesh here, the Whiskey Chief. If you made it this far in the episode, firstly, thank you so much. As you know, it takes a lot to put on these kinds of episodes. So if you can like and subscribe below, it really helps us bring the best whiskeys to you and keep doing this show the best we can. Thanks. And how are so you're talking about expenses and kind of the economics. How do the economics of whiskey work versus the economics of beer? Because with whiskey, obviously your aging we don't know how long, sometimes a few months, sometimes a few years. With beer, no aging, obviously, right? So, or you can have some aging, I guess, but generally speaking, less aging compared to whiskey. Would talk a little bit about how that works.
Well, I mean, so beer, the fastest time to turn around a batch of beer is about 3 weeks. The longest time is like this beer, the 5 years. So
5 years to make that beer?
5 years, but this is aged in barrels, so that's why.
What kind of barrel was that aged?
So this was aged in Burgundy barrels for 5 years with black cherries and red cherries.
You're just putting things in other things.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever comes your way. Let's put some of this and some of that.
Yeah, and
Love it. Very creative.
You could get a whiskey barrel and then you could fill it with beer, then empty it from beer, and then put whiskey back into the same barrel. Like you could do all sorts of things. Or you could you could distill a beer into whiskey, fill a whiskey barrel with it, and I don't know. There's all sorts of.
I agree. So when we
permutations
bought an independent bottling company about 6 years ago, where they had 600 casks of whiskey, and along the inventory sheet there was 15 barrels of gin, but in whiskey casks. So somebody 19 years ago had put gin into hogsheads and to see what would happen. And then forgot about it, or I don't know what they did with it. And so we're like, well, that's super exciting. Let's see what that's about. It's the worst gin I've ever tasted in my fucking life. It's not gin. It's not whiskey. I have no idea what we could. I'm gonna send you a sample of it, and then you need to tell me what we need to do with this thing, right? Because it needs to be put into a cocktail somehow.
I was going to say, I know some good cocktail guys.
We need to do. I don't even care about the money. I honestly will give these away if somebody can do something creative with it, and that that would be enough fulfillment for me that this went somewhere. Because now I think they're like 20-year-old. It's 20-year-old gin in like whiskey barrels. Yeah,
I mean that's pretty interesting, but not all experiments work. That's why they're experiments, right?
Yeah,
I agree.
So very clearly this did not work. And I'm a gin. I like gin, right? So I was excited to gin and whiskey. That sounds really cool. It's not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I think like when it comes to aging, when it comes to beer and things, just because it's older doesn't mean it's better. I say you can get young beers that are beautiful. You can get old barrel aged beers that go past best.
Same with whiskey, right? Sometimes age works, and sometimes actually some of the younger age statements are better. Like Glendronic's a good example for me. The single malt Glendronic. I actually prefer the 18 to the 21. I'm a big Glendronic fan. I like that kind of sherry, powerful kind of style. And I'm sure some people disagree and love the 21. But for me, the 18 is just the sweet spot, and it just kind of works way better, and it's obviously cheaper than the 21 or the 25. So
I mean,
it's just personal preference as well.
Time does cost, and like aging, like for us, we look at beers and we look at a beer that takes 3 weeks.
So let's get back to the economics of that.
That takes, for example, good lager. You think of lager as a very fast production beer. It's not. Lagering historically was when you'd take a beer in Germany and put it in an ice cave and store it for 6 months, and it would lager.
Is that where the term
word
comes from?
lager? It's a process of slowly aging something in a very cold temperature.
In what language does lager come from?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I'm guessing, hopefully German. I guess
German lager. Okay, so
I'd have
maybe
to.
German.
I'd have to ask Jorg, our German CFO.
Okay.
He would know better than
I
I
was
would.
just curious. You can look it up.
But yeah. So good lager should take time. And essentially that's how you get a beautiful crisp lager. We make a lager that we age sort of in the more traditional way. But you taste the difference between macro lager that's rushed.
So tell me more about the economics then of making beer versus making a whiskey. So beer obviously is a lower price point. Whiskey generally much higher price point on a per bottle basis, obviously. How as you're thinking about it, hey, do we consider doing a whiskey and all of that? Are you looking at the economics of it, or is it more for you like, hey, I just want to create something cool?
So one of my big, things I really care about within beer is elevating beer from cold, fizzy, bubbly stuff, which is, doesn't have much taste, to something which is a little bit more complex, like this kind of barrel-aged wine influence.
Yeah, very interesting.
And something like this, as a product, you can buy it, you can cellar it, you can age it, and there is a small niche of people in the world who really value vintage beers. So like we bought in an auction in California, we bought a whole lot of rare old beers up to like 30-year-old beers that were fascinating, and it was kind of like tasting the history of American craft beer.
Wow.
It was so cool to do, and I was very happy, and basically I was meant to sell them, but I drank quite a lot of them myself.
So let's try the next beer, and so Tom, what does a 30-year-old beer taste like? I would assume awful, but am I wrong?
Not could be, could not. But
was it for you?
There are a couple of absolutely beautiful, like especially if you get barley wines and sours. This beer is already 5 years old.
I've never had a 5-year-old beer. So I'm
gonna pour it in a whiskey glass again if that's good for you. So this is black cherry.
That doesn't even look like a beer. What is this?
So
what is going on here?
This is
my wine went wrong. Like
this is up the creek. So this is 5 years. This is 100% Brett fermented, black Australian cherries in a Burgundy barrel, and then it is so you're gonna get kind of
oh wow,
it's quite funky. It's got a little bit of funk to it, but it's also,
I think funky is what I would definitely describe this as.
And you get sort of like quite a lot of the heavily oxidized character or sherry note coming through. You've got slightly leathery, but then it has the red fruit, which kind of makes it vibrant as well.
I get kind of like a raspberry strawberry style, like on the nose, a little bit of that. And the color is kind of a musky kind of, somewhere brown, somewhere red, kind of dark.
Yeah.
There's definitely there's no bubbles. There's none of that. It's kind of like halfway wine, halfway. Is this what 30-year-old beer, does that Is it kind of on this trajectory, but like
Yeah. Well,
further, obviously not aged in a wine cask, so that's different. But
yeah, I mean, a 30-year-old lager would be terrible. It needs to be either low enough pH or high enough ABV. So
yeah,
it needs to be like 8% or above, or pH 3.2.
because the ABV will go down over time. Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
because it'll preserve it over time,
Right.
essentially. And then those kind of beers that you can age.
I'll say my first sip I didn't love. Maybe I just wasn't ready for it. But now kind of going into a second and third sip, it's kind of
Got a
growing
balance.
on me.
Yeah,
It's starting to grow on me a
it's
little
quite
bit.
an intense character, and you've got to say you've got that sort of notes of the red wine barrel. You've got a little bit leathery note to it, and
What's the sourness I'm getting on the back palate and the citrus? Where's that
yeah.
coming from?
Earlier I mentioned about the lactobacillus, which makes that kind of like a fresh lactic acid. This one here has pediococcus and Brettanomyces in it, and essentially they're producing an acetic acid, which is a more sort of let's say almost like vinegary, more like intense acidity.
Yeah, there is a vinegary kind of style to this.
Yeah. So this is slowly produced over time, and in some traditional beers like Flanders Reds, you get these bacteria. So we use
Super
lab cultured
interesting.
bacteria that we had into this. But I was connecting this back to whiskey.
Yeah.
Is about that. The point is if you people are starting to take buying barrel aged beer seriously. Like my hope, I'd like to have auctions like you have with whiskey, but also for great beer. Like
Interesting.
what you can, the selling potential of this kind of stuff is real. Like it's being served in some of the best restaurants in the world, like Caprice, the 3 Michelin-star restaurant in Hong Kong. Those guys are serving it. Like Noma, I did a really cool project with the creative director last year, and so people are starting to take it seriously. Like
Yeah.
barrel aging.
How did the Caprice thing all come together? Did you know them? I love Caprice, one of the best restaurants in Hong Kong. I would argue probably one of the best restaurants in the world. It's at the Four Seasons, the cheese room. I would go to Caprice and just eat cheese and have a glass of Sauternes and be like super happy. All the rest of the food is great too, but like it's in my opinion that's like pretty amazing. They also do I haven't done this yet, but they do a foie gras burger. I think only at the bar.
Yes, I've had that too.
It's like it's like 900 Hong Kong dollars. It's like 120. It's like 120 US dollars for a burger. So I haven't quite made it for that yet, but I would like to try that.
I think someone gave it to me. I didn't realize it's that expensive.
Well, you've got a birthday coming up. Maybe that's a good treat.
So actually, if you go to the cheese room there, Victor Petois, who's the sort of the guy who's running everything there, him and the chef, he has a project that we made together, which was aged in as a Van Joan barrel aged sour beer called Modern History. Go and try their 36-month Comté with a little bit of modern history.
Oh,
It is a wonderful combination.
see, that sounds good. I've never even tried it yet, but that's like you got me thinking like, oh, that sounds really cool.
So
And cheese and beer is not something I would ever really do, right? Cheese and wine, right? That's kind of the traditional, what you would think of. But that's really pushing the limits or not pushing the limits, but trying new things.
it is trying new things, but I think there's that Van Joan yellow wine influence, which is great, and it works really well. It was a great fun project to do with him. Originally, I said no to it because he asked me to get yellow wine barrels, which are pretty hard to find, from Jura. And Victor, being Victor, said no problem. And
I got it.
he flew over 2 barrels to Hong Kong, and they arrived next week in my brewery. And so I said yes, and we did the project.
Cool. So coming back to the economics, let's talk about the economics of beer because I'm curious, right? So obviously, beer sells at a relatively low price point, there's production levels, etc. Does most of your budget or money go into marketing? Is that what you have to think about if you're starting a beer brand?
I think that because
it's a crowded market, I guess is what I'm saying, right? I mean, it's amazing how much it's grown, but you're saying there's 14 craft breweries in Hong Kong, which is a relatively small city, so that's amazing to me that there's 14, but that's not easy either. So is marketing the biggest part of your budget?
Everything matters.
Thank you.
Everything matters. That a product is a sum of everything. and you can't cut corners anywhere. So as a, like, we were a bootstrap business. We've never had big investors or anything. We just literally started a shack on the side of the road.
You've never raised any money. It's all just you and your brother.
Basically, so far, it's been me and my brother and a couple of friends. And
Amazing.
That's it. So at that point, the most important thing is your product. You've got to make an absolutely banging product. You've got to make a beer that, if the label says it's going to do this,
it's got to deliver.
It's got to deliver. So
which I would say, trying your 4 beers today, they all deliver exactly what you
I appreciate it.
what you say. They're all different flavors. I like some more than others. That's normal, but yeah, they definitely deliver what you set out to do.
Yeah,
So congrats. That's good.
The quality of the product matters. The artwork, like, you got to always. I remember that, not everyone knows who Yardley Brothers is. So if you have an amazing artwork that's kind of like, Oompa Loompas on the front.
Yeah, well, and I like you're using different styles of bottles, right? You're not only doing cans. Obviously, as we go to some of the stuff that's more, you're kind of, closer to wine bottles style, because it's more like that. So
yeah,
that's very creative.
So yeah, you have to be creative with your packaging and design. Great product. And yeah, good marketing begins with the product and goes from there. And but at the end of the day, you've got to have a great product. And I mean, you've also got to really believe in it, because, like, if it's your life project and you really believe in this, that's gonna keep you pushing forward and wanting to do it. And,
well, it sounds like you found your life's calling, which is pretty amazing. Let's try this last whiskey then. So this is the Peated.
So this is the Peated one. Yeah. So this is actually one of the oldest ones. When I say old, this is less than a year old.
Oh, okay.
And this is more heavily peated, but it's got a lot of caramel malt, like very heavily caramel, like tons of.
Are you a big peat guy? Do you like peaty, smoky? Drinking an ashtray style.
I do Islay whiskeys for sure. I really enjoy Lagavulin, Talisker.
Open 14 is my go-to.
Oh, but yeah,
we were drinking it last night. That's kind of, so I'm more on the lighter peaty style. I'm not quite at the Lefroy, Brooklotic and Octomore and all that kind of side of things, but I do enjoy a touch of peat. To me, this is not very heavy. What's the peat? People who are peat freaks, right, would ask you, what's the peat parts per million? What is the ppm?
The ppm on this, I think we were using about 35% at 40 ppm.
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah. So that's so like a Lefroy is much higher than that, right? But that's actually quite a decent amount of peat. I don't get that on the
but this
flavor.
this is not Scottish malt.
Right.
This is from New Zealand.
Ah, right. So it's much lighter peat than New Zealand.
But this is just.
I guess because it doesn't rain as much, or what creates different kinds of peat? It's just the forest and so peat is obviously like the floor, basically.
Yeah, my knowledge of peat is limited to being a kid and seeing it burn on the fire as a kid.
Right.
And obviously drinking. I definitely don't know that much about
interesting.
Peat,
it is very different in different places. Like even in Scotland. I was really lucky once went up to Highland Park in Orkney, which is, as you know, like very, very, very far north Scotland, right? It's almost the laterally the Nordics, basically, like with Norway, etc. And they consider themselves more Nordic than part of Scotland. Like they don't wear kilts, they don't celebrate the Scottish holidays. They celebrate more like the Nordic, because that island, I guess, was fought over for years, for centuries, between the Vikings and the Scots and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, the interesting part about Highland Park that I learned when I was there was when you land on Orkney, which is this tiny island of like a few thousand people, is you immediately notice there's no trees. There's no trees in Orkney because the wind is so strong and it's like brutally killing that trees never grow, because as soon as they grow at any kind of height, they basically get fall over and get ripped out. So interestingly, because there's no trees in Orkney, the peat is much lighter than the peat that you get on Islay, because their trees grow, and so that contributes, one of the factors to why Highland Park as a brand has kind of that lighter peat style compared to like a Lefroy or a Bowmore or whatever. So I enjoyed that.
You're working with what you've got, right? Like
exactly.
And I mean, I do really enjoy peaty whiskies, and this was what we were looking for here is like, okay, how can we create something that it's still very young, but imagine this in 12 years with a little bit more peat to it, how it could mellow. You'd be thinking more along the sides of like a traditional.
And this is being aged in a bourbon barrel, or what are you aging this in?
Yes. So this one was a.
It tastes like it's in a bourbon barrel.
This one was but it's not a bourbon barrel. This is a bourbon Badmow.
Okay.
So it's again,
Yes,
it's that
right.
that ratio.
Sorry, yeah. But that's the idea, is that you could do this in a bourbon. This I really love, and I would not look if I drank this again blind, and I didn't know the age. I would guess young, but I would not guess 1 year. I would probably guess more like 5-6 year kind of level. So that's really impressive what you can create in a year. I would drink this. Like, I think this is very, for me, this was my favorite whiskey of the ones that we tried. And maybe more, I guess that's probably because it's closer to more traditional, what I'm used to, right? And that's what I enjoy.
This was a result of multiple batches, and then we were like, okay, we think this is more close. The other ones I've been showing you, these are experiments. These are like we're things
which we really appreciate. Thank you for bringing that, which is really cool. Last question from my side. What's I guess one story of a pivotal moment that you've had with Yardley Brothers in the last 10 years where it was potentially, go or no go, or almost bust, or whatever. Like, there must have been a moment where maybe you thought, holy shit, are we gonna make it? Is this something I should really, be doing? Maybe there was more than one moment, but people, yeah. But tell us one moment. What was that? What was the moment, and how did you guys get through that?
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, right at the beginning, as I mentioned, we had Pierre was amazing. He gave us this
such a generous gift. Yeah,
there was the beginning of everything, and then we took all our savings. We cashed it. My wife had a life insurance policy. We cashed that in. We got some money.
I'm not sure she was happy about that.
She's still part of the company, so she quit her job and she joined, and so it became a fully family business. And so we got going. We kicked off. We were all ready to go, and we had barley and we had our license, and we're like, right, let's make our first batch of beer. And so we brewed our first batch of beer. Brew day went fine, and then you have something called knockout. So knocking out is when you've finished boiling and you run through the heat exchanger, and then you go into the fermentation tanks. So once the beer is at fermentation temperature, like at 20 degrees, that must be perfectly sanitary. And the knockout pump failed. And it didn't turn. And if you leave the beer hot with all those hops in it, it's going to over extract. And so me and my brother were like, what are we going to do? So we had a backup pump, luckily.
Okay.
So we rushed into the storeroom, got a backup pump. We wired in the backup pump, and then turned it on. But we forgot to sanitize the backup pump.
Oh, shit.
And so
because you were rushing.
Yeah. So we knocked out, and like we were already running thin on money at the time. We knocked out our first batch, contaminated.
Oh, crap.
And we tasted it, and we're like it's not good. And then we were like, but if we dump this,
how much beer are we talking? What kind of value do you think that had at that time?
It was 700 liters of beer. So 700 liters of beer, retail value, probably like $20,000 Hong Kong, something like this.
So like 3,000 US, but that's a lot when you're just starting.
Yeah, for sure. So that was really painful. We dumped it. We poured it all down the drain, and that was
that hurt. Actually, as you're dumping it,
that was really painful. And then we made sure not to fuck up again.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to sanitize the pump. So you learned that lesson.
Yeah. So that was and I think that this whole thing for me has been this interesting learning process where you're not perfect, but you constantly try to improve and trying to learn from your mistakes and do things better.
Well, I think that's an amazing way to end things. So thank you so much for taking the time to, well, bring these samples, share with us your story, share with us a bit of your vision of where you're going. I definitely learned a lot. I mean, it's amazing, how much you maybe consume something, but you don't really know a lot about it, right? I've drank beer pretty much my whole life, like since I was, old enough to drink it. And I've learned more today than I have, at all, but in the rest of my life. So I really appreciate that. I think it's super interesting to hear, what made you jump from, starting to brew to actually getting it going. I think it's super interesting to hear some of the stories around some of the artwork and the inspiration. And I love the way you think about things as an artist, like you're creating your, there's a lot of creativity. It comes out in kind of everything that you're saying, which I really enjoyed learning about. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thanks, man. Cheers.
All right. Hey guys, Rickesh here, the Whiskey Chief. Firstly, thanks so much for watching this episode. It really means a lot to us. If you can, like and subscribe below. It just really helps us to keep bringing you the best whiskeys in the world. Solange, and I'll talk to you soon.